The Bolivian government has rejected a statement issued by the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States, which calls into question the impartiality of the country's judicial branch. Russia has recalled its ambassador in Washington for talks after U.S. President Joe Biden said his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, would pay the price for alleged election meddling. And Tanzanian President John Magufuli has passed away at the age of 61 after suffering with a heart condition. Hello and welcome to TeleSUR English. I am Estefania Bravo from the headquarters of Quito in Ecuador. This is from the south. The Bolivian government has responded to a statement issued by the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States referring to legal proceedings against those responsible for the 2019 coup against the Evo Morales government. In the statement published by the Bolivian Foreign Ministry, the government calls on OAS member states to defend the organization's charter, which privileges non-intervention, respect for self-determination, dialogue, and negotiation. The statement also stresses that the plurinational state of Bolivia will defend its sovereignty, the independence of its bodies, and they will not succumb to malicious provocations. The statements come in response to claims made by the OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro that the ruling party was abusing a judicial mechanism. It should be recalled that Almagro has a widely known history of meddling in the internal affairs of progressive nations of the region and played a fundamental role in the 2019 coup. And in view of these unfounded claims made by the Secretary General of the OAS regarding judicial independence in Bolivia, the Puebla Group also issued a statement. The Progressive Group noted it viewed the statements of the Secretary General Luis Almagro regarding an alleged abuse of judicial mechanisms in Bolivia with great concern, stressing the flagrantly disregards the independence of the different branches of the country. The group stressed that it does not recognize the moral authority of the Secretary General. It also reiterated that as long as the organization lacks an impartial Secretary General, it will continue to serve as a mechanism to generate conflicts in the region. Moving on to Colombia, members of the Congress for the right-wing Democratic Center Party have presented a bill to authorize a mass possession of firearms. The bill was presented by Congress members Maria Fernanda Cabal and Cristian Garces. Senator Cabal described this initiative as a means for Colombians to defend themselves against the dangers they face. In a country that has been racked by decades of internal conflict and where violence continues despite the accords signed in 2016, experts have stressed that restrictions on firearms have been essential to lowering murder rates in recent years. A report by Colombian social movement and human rights defenders details the systematic assassinations of social and community leaders, as well as the limited action on the part of the authorities to tackle the ongoing violence and the alleged involvement of state agents. Our correspondent, Hernán Tovar, brings us more details in the following report.
The Institute for Development and Peace Studies presented a report revealing the systematic violence against and assassinations of social leaders and human rights defenders. The investigation includes the cases recorded in the northern regions of Cauca, Urabá, Antioqueño, El Bajo Atrato, Chocoano, South Córdoba, and Bajo Cauca, Antioqueño, between November 2016 and July 2020. Most of the assassinations had the same characteristics. The victims are leaders and human rights defenders that support the peace agreement. The majority of the victims, more than 90%, are advocates of the agreement. They defend its projects, especially the substitution of illegal crops, those linked to land rights, and also the environment. The report stated that 255 people were murdered, 213 of them social leaders and human rights defenders. 42 were former guerrilla combatants. The largest number of victims were leaders in their communities, among which are indigenous people, farmers, Afro-descendants, trade union representatives, and local politicians. The situation is further complicated by the lack of results in the investigations by Attorney General's office and its reports questioned by these organizations.
One comes to realize that the person or people responsible were not charged with murder, but with illegal possession of weapons, with criminal conspiracy, and even with drug trafficking. So there is no connection between what is being done about these homicides and what the legal authorities are actually doing. What we finally agreed on is that there is very little reliable information.
Analysts stress their concerns, as in the areas where investigations took place, the presence of the army or the police has increased, and according to some victims' testimonies, members of the security forces have failed to respond to armed groups, such as the neo-paramilitaries.
We have reports from social leaders with documented cases in the south of Córdoba, in the north of Cauca, in Urabá Antioqueño, and Bajo Atrato, Chococano, in the northeast and Bajo Cauca Antioqueño, where people tell us that the army knew they were there. The police force knows that this area is controlled by the Gulf clan, and some leaders told us that their actions were very similar to those of the paramilitaries, because there are leaders who survived this violence, with a record of encounters, the warnings and prohibition, and the intention of controlling their daily lives.
Ultimately, it is clear that behind these crimes is the Gulf Clan drug cartel and right-wing neo-paramilitary group in the first place, followed by the Caparros gang, and thirdly, the remaining dissident elements of the armed groups of the internal conflict. All are present in these territories and dispute their control and the illegal income from drug and arms trafficking and illegal mining.
TeleSUR, Bogotá.
In Peru, a hearing to decide whether to grant a request for 18 months of preventive detention for former President Martín Vizcarra is set to continue on Thursday. Peruvian Judge Maria de los Ángeles Álvarez opened the hearing via video conference this Wednesday, which is linked to the corruption investigations against the former president. According to local media outlets, the prosecutor leading the case, Germán Juárez, has testimonies from up to 5 people who claim to have been involved in the payment of alleged bribes to Vizcarra in exchange for public works contracts when he was governor of Moquegua from 2011 to 2014. Last week, the prosecutor's office requested preventive detention for 18 months as Vizcarra is presumed a flight risk, while suggesting he could work to obstruct justice. Also in Peru, transporters are continuing their national indefinite strike action in protest of an increase in fuel prices and operating costs. Several highways in the country remain blocked. The National Union of Transporters and Drivers is also protesting the increase in the toll prices and the authorization for informal taxes, as well as voicing other labor demands. Sector workers have called on Congress and regional authorities to take action to prevent shortages in the domestic market due to the stoppage and the roadblocks. Authorities of the Ministry of Transportation of Communications stated that the executive will provide answers to the proposals made by the union in a bid to stop the strike action. Paraguayan lawmakers on Wednesday debated an opposition request for an impeachment trial against President Mario Abdo Benitez for, quote, poor performance during the coronavirus pandemic. The opposition parties, who form a minority in the parliament, accused Benitez and his vice president, Hugo Velázquez, of corruption and ineptitude in dealing with the health crisis. A resurgence of the COVID-19, which has overburdened hospitals in the country in recent weeks, has given rise to large street protests by people angry about a shortage of personal protective gear and other equipment and insufficient hospital beds. The health minister resigned earlier this month, and the president announced a cabinet reshuffle on March 7th. Since March 5th, thousands of Paraguayans have been mobilizing in different cities of the country in rejection of the government's mishandling of the pandemic and the deepening of the economic crisis and social inequality. In Ecuador, two presidential candidates continued their campaign activities this Wednesday in the lead up to the second round votes to be held on April 11th. Andrés Arauz, representing the Progressive Union for Hope coalition, and former banker Guillermo Lasso of the center-right alliance between his creating parties and the Social Christian Party, will have until April 8th to present their government proposals to the electorate. Both candidates held campaign activities to the south of the capital on Wednesday, where Andrés Arauz visited rural areas and proposed environmental policies. Meanwhile, Guillermo Lasso met with farmers' organizations in the area. This Wednesday in Haiti, a large group of masked police officers belonging to a disgruntled sector of the National Police Force, who call themselves Phantom 509, stormed several police stations in the capital. The Rush group freed fellow officers that had been jailed accused of participating in an alleged coup against embattled President Jovenel Moïse last month. The group, along with some civilians, also set a police station ablaze and then headed to a local Nissan dealership that was vandalized, setting cars on fire. The Haitian capital is experiencing a crime wave that includes kidnappings for ransom, along with entire sections of Port-au-Prince being under the control of violent gangs. At the same time, pressure mounts for President Jovenel Moïse to step down as opponents argue his constitutional term ended on February 7th. We're taking our very first break now. Join us again after this. And also, don't forget to follow me on my Twitter account at TeleSUR for more news on Latin America and the Caribbean as well. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. Russia has recalled its ambassador in Washington, Anatoly Antonov, for talks to prevent the, quote, irreversible deterioration of relations with the U.S. after President Joe Biden said his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, would pay the price for alleged election meddling and called him a killer.
The new U.S. administration took office about 2 months ago, and the symbolic 100-day mark is not too far away, which is a good occasion for trying to appraise what Joe Biden's team has managed to do and where it was not very successful. The most important thing for us is to identify ways of rectifying Russia-U.S. relations, which have been going through hard times as Washington has, as a matter of fact, brought them to a blind alley. We are interested in preventing an irreversible deterioration in relations if the Americans become aware of the risks associated with this. This is what we will talk about during the consultations that the Foreign Ministry and other relevant agencies will hold with the Russian ambassador to the United States.
This move to recall the Russia's ambassador to the U.S. came as relations between the two countries are increasingly strained. In the latest attack from the U.S. President Joe Biden, he reiterated allegations of Russian interference in the November 2020 elections to help Donald Trump win during a televised interview. Biden also called Russian President Vladimir Putin a killer with no soul and warned of consequences if the allegations of meddling were confirmed. Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Ministry reiterated its rejection of these allegations through its deputy minister Sergei Ryabkov, who described them as a distortion that is nothing more than speculation. The leader of the Russian lower house also asserted that the attacks against President Putin are attacks against the country. President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, said on Wednesday that the country's health authorities are still confident about using AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine.
Mexican medical specialists are working on it, and they are in communication with the World Health Organization. There is research in the world, and doubts are beginning to be cleared up, and the vaccine is authorized for use. We have already used thousands of AstraZeneca vaccines, and we haven't had any problems with the vaccine.
Cuba and Iran continue to evaluate the efficacy of safety of the Cuban vaccine candidate Soberana 02. The two nations are making progress in the clinical trials of the drug, one of the 5 Cuban vaccine candidates created to fight the novel coronavirus. Cuba's Finlay Vaccine Institute and the Pasteur Institute of Iran signed an agreement on January 8th to carry out phase 3 clinical trials of the vaccine candidates in Iran, despite both countries being subject to harsh U.S. sanctions, which severely limit their access to medicines. They have worked to develop their own vaccines and treatments in the face of the pandemic. Brazil reported over 2,800 daily fatalities due to COVID-19 on Tuesday, double the number of deaths registered by the U.S., which remains the nation most affected by the virus in the world. The latest data provided by the National Council of Health Secretaries brings the overall COVID-19 death toll to over 281,000. The contagion curve is also skyrocketing, with more than 74,000 new cases reported in 24 hours, bringing the total number to over 11.5 million. Hospital occupancy rates are more than 80%. In the midst of this crisis, far-right President Jair Bolsonaro has appointed the 4th health minister since the pandemic began. And Brazil's new health minister, Marcelo Queiroga, has admitted that social distancing is necessary to contain the pandemic that is wreaking major havoc in the country, and called for unity to fight the virus. Such statements may seem common sense, but they present a novelty in the government of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, who has continuously downplayed the seriousness of the virus and failed to control its spread in the country. Even as the health crisis rages on, Bolsonaro continues to promote crowds, reject the use of masks, and question the effectiveness of the vaccines. Queiroga is his 4th health minister since the pandemic began, and while he has assured that he will make changes to the policy to fight COVID-19 in the country, he has also vowed to rigorously follow the president's instructions. The director of the Pan American Health Organization has warned of the escalating crisis in Brazil, where a record of over 2,800 COVID-19 deaths were recorded on Tuesday, stressing the need for leadership to halt the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, the organization has also noted it continues to recommend the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine.
In Brazil is a cautionary tale that keeping this virus under control requires continuous attention by public health authorities and leaders to protect people and health systems alike from the devastating impact of this virus.
PAHO recommends the continued use of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine while the European cases are being investigated, and we do not anticipate any impact of this invention on distribution through the COVAX mechanism.
We're taking one last short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. Tanzanian President John Magufuli has passed away at the age of 61. Vice President Samia Suluhu made the announcement on state television, informing that the president had passed away due to a heart condition which he had suffered for a decade at a hospital in Dar es Salaam. Magufuli had first been briefly admitted to a cardiac institute on March 6, but was subsequently discharged. However, he was pushed to the hospital again on March 14th after feeling unwell. According to Tanzania's constitution, the vice president should assume the presidency for the remainder of the 5-year term that Magufuli began serving last year after winning a second term in office.
Fellow citizens, it is with deep regret that I inform you that today, on the 17th of March 2021, at 6 p.m., we lost our brave leader, the President of the Republic of Tanzania, Honorable John Pombe Joseph Magufuli, who has died of a heart condition at the Msera Hospital in Dar es Salaam, where he was being treated. On the 14th of March, he fell unwell and he was rushed to Masena Hospital, where he continued with his treatment under supervision of doctors from Kikewe Cardiac Hospital until his demise. Funeral arrangements are being made, and you will be notified. Our country shall be in a mourning period of 14 days, and the flag shall fly at half-mast.
Tanzanians reacted with sadness to the news of the death of President John Magufuli, who passed away this Wednesday at the age of 61.
Our president whom we loved, and he loved us, the poor. We learned the news with deep shock, the death of our beloved president, John Pombe Magufuli. He was the president of the less privileged. We voted for him, and now that he has left us, those who voted for him, our hearts are in deep pain.
Lebanon's President Michel Aoun on Wednesday urged the Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri to, quote, quickly form a government or step aside as the country's economic crisis deepens. Lebanon's deeply divided political class has failed to agree on a new cabinet since a massive explosion in Beirut port last August that killed more than 200 people and led to the government's resignation. The country is in the midst of its worst economic crisis since the 1975 to 1990 civil war. The Lebanese pound has almost 90% of its value on the black market. On Wednesday, protesters briefly tried to storm the economic ministry to denounce the explosion in commodity prices. According to exit polls in the Netherlands, the ruling People's Party for Freedom and Democracy is set to win the general elections. The poll suggests the party secured 36 of the Dutch Parliament's 150 seats, representing 2 more than in the previous election, securing Prime Minister Mark Rutte a 4th term in office. In second place is the progressive D66 party, a member of Rutte's outgoing coalition government, led by Foreign Minister Sigrid Kaag with 27 seats, representing an increase of 8 and the party's best ever result. Meanwhile, the far-right anti-Islam Freedom Party lost 3 seats compared to the 2017 election, finishing with 17 seats.
Yes, I am very happy for the 4th time, and it is very special. And also to have had the honor of having managed certain major crises that we have had. The economic repression, the refugee crisis, and now the coronavirus crisis. As a great party, yes, that makes you very humble, a huge honor.
In the U.S., New York City mayoral candidate Andrew Yang expressed his concern about a series of shootings in the Atlanta area that left 6 Asian women dead. Yang stressed the women were targeted on the basis of their race and called on the country's leaders to do more. A 21-year-old gunman identified as Robert Aaron long has confessed to the killings of 8 people, 7 women and 1 man in spas around Atlanta. The attacks have shaken the country's Asian community.
This cannot be allowed to continue. In New York, in this country, that anti-Asian racism is deadly. It's real, it is growing stronger and more powerful. And we call on people of every community to come together and say that Asian Americans are human beings. Asian Americans are just as American as everyone else. That these women did not deserve to be targeted like this and have their lives taken away.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on our social media accounts. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram as well. For TeleSUR English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.